living organisms, that we are dealing with, but not dealing with as cold physicians, as people who are in states of transformation ourselves, primarily as we would describe it as practitioners, but more than just practitioners who are human, practitioners who have all the capacity to learn and to relearn, to grow and to ungrow. And so in many ways, this is our DNA. CDRA has a spirit that is not owned by a board, that is not owned, it is pioneered by the practitioners. It has been supported by the board, but those practitioners have been in ongoing transformation with other entities across the globe, in fact. And so I don't want to speak about the death and the birth. And at the same time, I mean, often in Arabic, there is a certain word that they use for death, it's wafat, and that literally means death. But a more common word in classical Arabic is intiqal. It's also used in Persian and in Urdu. So you say the person transformed, he transformed. And in some ways, the person transforms into a new being, and that's another world that is entered. But of course, the person also leaves us. And when the person leaves us, there are moments of sadness and so on. And yeah, we are doing that. As I'm sitting here, I just started my breakfast. By the way, I'm serious, that's about 11:30. But I also have another part of my breakfast in front of me. And this is an avo, half an avo, that is a part of my breakfast. Now, most of the time, we would only think of the light green here as consequential. This is what we're going to eat. And the more conscious amongst us will put the avocados, the core, will put the core into recyclable things that will go into compost. But the truth is that only from one perspective is the light green what you're going to eat. Only from a very human perspective is this of consequence and the core of no consequence. But inherent in this avocado that must be eaten or that must get rotten, part of this avocado is the seed that hardly gets any attention from ordinary human beings. And this is the wonderful project that we are embarking upon officially today. But the seed itself is the product of years of a long period of gestation. And so the series of webinars that we have here starting today itself is part of a long process. And that long process is a part of perhaps too long a death or proclamation of the death of CDRA. As an undertaker, I feel quite fatigued, but need to carry this process through. Amongst the Toraja people in Indonesia, and I'm not going to be too long, people, I'm too long already. Amongst the Toraja people in Indonesia, a funeral takes about 2-3 years. And they need to save up a hell of a lot of money, you know, to have this body stored in the mountain caves and so on. Okay, but I'm not going to go. So I just want to say a warm welcome to everybody. Thanks for the journeying with us. We look forward to seeing you in the rest of the series. Tell more friends about it. CDRA is dead. CDRA is alive, alive through the impact of its work, through the associates, through the launch of this webinar, through smaller projects that Doug and Sue are primarily handling, through the handover of our building to a worthy heir, SCAT, and through the life of just the ongoing and determined holding of relationships that there has been amongst us. So a warm welcome to this seminar, and I certainly look forward to a wonderful presentation by Sue Davidoff that admittedly I had enjoyed already in my reading of it. So thank you very much, people, and over to Doug. You can unmute yourselves to clap. I'm joking.
Farid, nog altijd hetzelfde.
Farid, thank you so much. And I just want to thank you for your amazing years of service, the vibrancy you brought, the impossible questions you asked, and just the way you lit up the boardroom in all of our board meetings. You have been, and you always will be, a really crucial part of CDRA's practice. And thank you for that opening. I'm going to ask Sue to now. Sue's the holder of the process today. I'm just the doorman. But Sue and I were co-colleagues for probably 14 years or so, 12 to 14 years, but have stayed connected all of this time. Has been a wonderful pleasure to work with, and a true CDRA practitioner. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Doug. From your introduction, I'm going to assume you meant this, Sue. Hi, everybody. As Doug said, I was a CDRA staff member and colleague for many years. And today I'm going to be with Sue Davidoff holding the space to explore the paper that she's written and that we as an editorial team chose as the opening paper for this series of workshops that will be running into July next year. So I just have to confess, my heart's racing a bit. It feels like it's a tremendously big moment to be opening this process of conversation and sharing that we hope is going to enrich our thinking in the weeks and months to come. So Sue Davidoff will introduce her paper, and then we've got a little process that we've planned to take us into engagement with it. So it's not a seminar, it's a workshop. Sue is a practitioner of many years standing. She started off her working life as a school teacher, and for many years worked in schools transformation, working facilitatively, working with social process in educational settings. And then for the last, I think, almost 20 years, Sue, you're going to have to put me right, Sue and Al Kaplan have been partners in many respects, but partners also in the professional endeavors of the Proteus Initiative and of the magnificent Towerland Wilderness Retreat. So I'm going to hand over to Sue, but I want to ask us to do a trick before I do that. I think now's the right time to do the trick, Sue. We're going to start our workshop with a little bit of a conversation between the two of us. And I learned this trick, which some of you will know, but some of you might not know, which is to ask you just for the next 20 minutes or so to do two things. The one is to weirdly switch off your cameras. And then the other one will be to go, if you hover over your own face, or I might be able to do it for all of us, on the three little dots, you see you've got an option, which is to, oh, it's gone. Oh, that's a mess. It's always like that. Okay, go into your video settings and you click on your video and then click on video settings. And you'll see underneath, if you've scrolled down, there's a box you can tick which says hide non-video participants. And if you apply that, then what we're going to get will be an opportunity, will be a space where just Sue and I can talk to each other. So just for those first 20 minutes of this workshop, you'll be able to have a bit of a fishbowl. Those of you, many of you will remember that technique, where a group observes a smaller group doing something. And so Sue Davidoff and I want to invite you to observe us in a fishbowl for the next 20 minutes. So see how that goes. Yeah, if everyone could switch, well done. Look, it's working. Thank you. If you can switch off your videos, and then I'm going to hand over to Sue to open the process while the rest of us get in place. Thank you. Sue, go for it.
Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Farid. You say your heart's beating, Sue, fast. My heart is beating incredibly fast, and it's wonderful, wonderful to be here with you this morning. And actually, when I think about it, it really feels also quite crazy, because I was never going to write a paper for this CDRA writing workshop. I was the facilitator who was holding the writing process, and it was never going to, I couldn't imagine doing both of those things together, of holding a process and at the same time writing a paper. So it afterwards, when the four of us, you and Doug and Ellen and I, were working together through the workshop process and the contributions and the process of other people's writing, it occurred to me that I had something that I wanted to write also. And what I wanted to write was, in fact, what had happened for me as the facilitator of that workshop. And so I got involved in a writing process too. And I also know that it was I who proposed that I open the series, not because I wanted for myself to open the series, but because it felt like it made so much sense, since what I've written about is in fact about CDRA's process CDRA's practice as it emerged through the process of that workshop. And it felt like, in a way, it would be a helpful and proper container for everything that is to follow, because the suggestion for people who were going to write and who were at the workshop was to bring their practice into writing, but through the writing showing their practice relationship to CDRA practice. And so, so as the workshop ended, I realized I had a contribution that I wanted to make. And I was really, really struck by that. And so here I am opening this process, and it feels very daunting. And I think to myself, what was I thinking when I made that suggestion? It feels like quite a crazy thing to do. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the brief that I had. The brief was to facilitate a process for people who had sent in proposals for pieces that they wanted to write for a CDRA publication, which was in a way an acknowledgement of the termination of CDRA as organization and the taking the legacy of CDRA into the future. So the process, the workshop here at Towerland, was about creating space for people to connect with CDRA practice, to make it conscious and visible for all of us, and then to create a spacious space for people to begin their own writing, hopefully through the workshop itself creating sufficient inspiration for them, and hopefully also that through the environment and the connection with others, they would begin to connect deeply with their own practice. And so that felt like that was my focus, and that was my work, was to facilitate that writing. And what happened for me was that I really began to think a lot about my own experience as a reader, not so much as a writer, but as a reader. And as a reader, what is it that I'm in search of when I'm reading that can really shift my state of being, that can really propel me into perhaps even another life stream what is it about reading that actually does that? And I realized it's not the handbooks and it's not the to-do books. It is books that somehow capture imaginatively and through the language itself can inspire and touch the feeling life of people. And there's something about poetics that comes into this for me. And I really had wanted, to be honest, and I don't know if I ever told you this, to frame the whole workshop around a phrase that comes from a French philosopher, Gaston Bachelard, which is, "The poet speaks on the threshold of being." And I wanted the workshop to create the possibilities and the spaces for people to access that threshold of being that is theirs. Because my sense is that's what really takes a legacy like CDRA's into the future. And this morning when I was walking, because for me walking is a very important way of preparing for whatever it is that I'm facing in a day, something quite amazing happened for me. I realized that actually a very, very important aspect of CDRA's practice that didn't come out in the workshop, I don't think it came out at all, or if it did, it wasn't very strong, was the practice of writing itself. The annual reports that CDRA put out, from what I have understood, had incredible reach. And those annual reports always had a thought piece in the beginning. And those thought pieces were pieces which were commenting on a particular aspect of the zeitgeist, the times we are living, but commenting in a way that brought the factual reality together with an imaginative picture that could begin to stir something in the hearts of other people. And I realized that actually that aspect of writing was what I was in search of as a person facilitating this process. But then I realized that actually, when I decided that I was going to write, that was what I was searching for in myself. So the brief of facilitating a writing workshop for people who wanted to write for this publication, that is still to be, was what I was writing about in my piece. And it was also then an exploration of my practice and CDRA's practice and the practice of writing itself. And my attempt in my piece was to bring all of those together congruently so that there was a kind of fidelity to practice that I was working out of my own practice, which is connected with a CDRA practice, that I was doing that within a CDRA gathering, and that the writing that I was doing was congruent with that. That was what I was attempting to do. So it's really, for me, thinking about writing as an art form. And this morning, can I say a little bit more?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, go for it. Carry on.
Just a little bit more that I want to say, that when I was walking this morning and thinking about writing as an art form, I had the sense, and it was living with me very deeply, that that art form is that place where the visible, manifest world connects or meets or intersects with the invisible world. That is what the poetics of writing is all about, to be able to give expression to that meeting between the visible and the invisible. And then the image came to me of the finger of God, Michelangelo's finger of God, with these two fingers, which are so close to one another, but they're not touching. And it is the sense of this presence of the invisible forces that meet that which is part of our earthly reality with that space in between, and the mystery of that space in between, where I think we find ourselves. And I think that what's so interesting about that kind of writing is that it's timeless. It's not confined to a particular period. It doesn't get dated. It has a quality of the eternal in it. So I think that was very much what I was attempting. And that was also very much part of, in my writing, but it was very much part of what I realize now I was in search of. And when I think of the motif of my own paper, which is drawing the curtain, which is looking at the relationship between the visible and the invisible, it's exactly the same thing. So I realized the complex layers that somehow come together so exquisitely in this whole process. And the sense that what I came to do, the job that I came to do, had layers of the invisible around it. I think I'm going to stop there, Sue.
Oh, okay. Thank you. You know, something happened in me when you did the gesture of the finger of God. Because I realized both in listening to you and in our preparation and in reading your paper, there are these two things. So, okay, for those who know me, including you, know I go quite basic quite quickly in order to understand the bigger stuff that's being spoken to. So the basic is, for me, there's writing and facilitation and holding, social process. And there was something in how you described earlier on, the writing for you, not just of your own attempts at writing, but also your understanding of CDRA's writing was itself a manifestation of a practice that was doing a particular thing in the world. And then the finger of God is that practice, is that kind of bringing us very close, but not quite merging or whatever, overlapping the visible and the invisible world. And it takes me to the social practice. It takes me to what CDRA was trying to do, which I know that I saw people here in the group for whom the encounter with CDRA was so similar to my own when I first encountered CDRA, which is that this organization is doing and talking about, and I'd say writing about, the stuff that I feel to be true, but I don't always know how to say it. And yet CDRA was striving, if I did this beautiful orthodoxy of CDRA, heurism, trial and error, experiential learning to reflect, grow the capacity of practitioners to do just this. And it feels like we're circling this world that can sound like a lot of blah, 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 but it's actually the work, I think, that CDRA came into the world to do, to try to bring that invisible closer, because that is essentially what I think it's our best self, isn't it, as human beings and as engagers in social process, that we're trying to get to that whole, and that whole must combine the visible and the invisible. And so I want to ask you, because we all struggle with writing. We all do. The people who thought to be good at writing or do it easily, and the people who don't do it easily or don't even do it. We all struggle with writing. How was it for you to write this piece as an instance of this practice that I think we all feel, even if we can't always say so clearly what we love about it?
I found it incredibly stretching. I found it incredibly challenging, because I knew that, as with this practice, which teaches me that every single moment matters, that there's nothing that escapes my any moment that is not my practice. Practice is who and how I am in the world. So the writing of a piece carries that same, for me, if it is to embody this practice, has to pay attention to every word. So it is a crafting. And it really, really stretched me to places that I don't think I've been to before. It's interesting, I've been working with a friend who is a writer and who lives in Paris. And he, earlier on during lockdown, he offered us a writing workshop. I think he was wanting to experiment with running workshops himself and running workshops online. So we had a whole series, Ellen and me and a few other people, of workshops with him. And it was so fantastic. I felt as though I learned an incredible amount through that. And I really began to find myself entering into what I'm talking about now, which is the art form of writing, where every word matters, where it is a crafting which really, in its own way, is in itself that space, that finger of God, that place perhaps between the two fingers.
And there's also something there in writing, which is, and I know you talk about it in your paper as well, that in the efforts to get to that thing that's hard to describe or say, you are stretched and enlarged in yourself, and even your ability to see it or say it is stretched further as well. And the word that comes to mind for me is specificity, which somehow links to the thing of economy of language. That it doesn't just come easily, but there's a striving to reach it. And as I say this, I realize I'm talking about writing a product, but I'm also talking about facilitation.
Mm.
So when we confronted by a situation, there's a lot going on, most of it invisible. Now, how do you stretch and reach into that situation in order to show up, using that phrase, or to be most worthy of it, in order to make a contribution that you know is shaping the situation, but also bringing out what is already there. And I know, sometimes people talk about writing like, you've got to write up what is there. And then other writers will say, no. The more you write, the more something comes to life, the more something appears. And so that is also true with social process facilitation. You as facilitator, you're sitting in a situation, as you describe in your paper, the situation we all arrived into when we did the CDRA closing workshop was quite hectic. It was quite full. It had a lot going on and mostly unspoken. So you as the most, yeah, exactly. It was all invisible. So your facilitation of that week, which you describe very beautifully in the paper and which I recall as being a very beautiful piece of work, in a way was helping name and give word and give voice to what was going on, and almost like, what the words you choose, the things you choose to pay attention to are also the things that are going to come more into the visible and shared space. And the things you don't give attention to, possibly because you don't see or intuit them, partly because you're making tactical choices, are the things that remain a little bit invisible, that they don't become less real, but they have a different status in the social process. And so the product you create in facilitating a week long of conversation and exploration and writing is in many ways uniquely authored by you, the facilitator. And I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about that process of, say, let's call it authoring, the workshop that you described so beautifully in your piece. And how was it to be holding that space on behalf of this sort of symbolic community, because we were, just a bunch of people who sort of ended up coming together, but also this whole history, this whole community that in some ways we have more representatives of here today than we even had at Thailand. Yeah.
Sure. I wanted to come back to, so I'm very glad that you brought that, the holding of the process. And it was a very remarkable experience for me. It was tough, Sue. It was tough because I felt, in a way, the gravitas of the situation. I really felt this phenomenon of CDRA's last rites, because that's what it was, in a way. So there was that. There was also the sense that what I've been speaking about now, that if there is a product to come out of this process, the product needs to be worthy, really needs to be worthy of the legacy of CDRA, but it needs to be worthy of the people who are there, and it needs to be worthy of the time that we were spending together. So there was the sense that I didn't feel like I was holding responsibility for the quality of writing that would eventually come out, but I did feel that I was holding a space which the more the days unfolded, the more I realized, the wider and wider the space became that I was holding, because it was no longer just focusing on this writing project. It was actually a whole set and web of relationships that were part of this invisible weaving that was happening around. It had to do with many different layers and levels of dynamics that were there. It had to do with the sense of this long history of CDRA and this really seminal moment. There were people at the workshop who felt that we needed to have proper funeral rites. So there was that sense, I don't know if you remember that, but there was that moment of, well, how do we address this particular moment? It is, it's seminal, you know, it's a big moment. So I felt at all times really sitting at the threshold of being. I felt as though I was sitting on the edge of my seat, not with tension, but with a very high state of alert, to make sure that somehow the voices of everybody who was there were being heard, and that the things that I was somehow sensing into that were unspoken and could be interruptions or obstacles or difficulties in the process itself could find a place of expression, whether in the process itself or outside of the process. And I think one thing that was really very, very important for me, because the stakes did feel very high. Well, there are two things. That one of the other high stakes was that I am Alan's partner. And Alan, as one of the founders of CDRA, and now as a participant in the workshop, added a certain intensity for me and a certain additional responsibility. But the thing that was most important for me was that my holding group, which was you and Doug and Alan, and that we were able to reflect together every day, really created a container for me to enable me to create a container for the process itself.
Sure, I'm just remembering those debriefing sessions. I think I had a tantrum one night. I said I wanted to go and have fun. I didn't want to debrief all night. It was a lot of holding.
But you're good at tantrums.
I'm going to do this. That's amazing. Sure, Sue, thank you. Okay, that sense of it, as you held this thing that you were holding, the feeling of it expanding, they're becoming more and more to hold.
Yes.
That's beautiful. And I think every single person here today who's in any way try to hold a big complex process will relate to that. I mean, that for me just gives me a whole new gesture of what it means to facilitate something where something truly is coming to life. And many things came to life in that process. Some of the reconciliations, the growing understanding, the renewed relationships that you talk to in your paper. some ideas, I think, inside of each person, those who did end up completing a writing piece and those who didn't, for everybody there, new ideas, new thinking came to life that lives. You know, Farid said something about CDRA lives in CDRA's enduring impact. And I think that's true for any well-held social process. Something comes to life and it lives there as a product. You know, you don't have to have written the report or built the building afterwards to have something living inside of you if the process has gone well. And so much came to life in individuals, between individuals, in the whole group in that week. I know, for example, the Tiny Trust, that is one of CDRA's legacy projects, came to life that week. It was literally thought of and began to be discussed amongst people in that week. But many of those discussions happened outside of the formal process, outside of the workshop. And you mentioned that in your paper as well. And I wanted to ask you what you thought about that. We know that when we're in residence together, we're always in the process, right? The process is everywhere. There's the meeting and then there's the process around the process and everything. And you said this thing, something about conversations outside of the process, and you have this lovely phrase, yet they shift its texture. So, and I really appreciate you saying it worked for you to have Doug and Al and I holding, because there was this huge process being held inside of Towerland, which is its own process as well. And many of the conversations that happened outside of the workshop did shift the texture of the workshop itself. It shifted the material you could then work with as facilitator. I'm wondering, and this is perhaps just sort of off what's at left field, but what does that mean for us working in COVID, where there's less chance to be in community, in social, in-person community, whether it's for day-long or half-day-long meetings, or even that beautiful Rolls Royce of being in residence together. Where does the stuff that comes to life that could shift the texture of the formal process go to? When we can't even have a little gossip over the tea station, never mind sit up late into the night thrashing through ideas. And yeah, I don't know if that raises anything for you. I'm just curious to know what you think about that.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's so interesting. I'll say to you in a minute what comes to mind, because it's it actually brings up a lot of grief for me when you ask a question like that, deep grief at what we've lost through not being able to meet in that way. But I just want to go back a step and say that that image that I had of the field expanding during the course of the week arrived for me in that moment that I said it. I hadn't thought about it before. And I think that is the value, not the value, but the importance as part of practice is living conversation. So in the conversation between you and me now, through what you raised, I suddenly saw this, and it really was that the field began to grow. And what it makes me think is that it's in a way that the invisible starts to enter into the visible space, that actually through being aware that in any situation that we're ever in, there are these invisible forces and realities, that the more we pay attention to what's really happening, the more we invite consciousness and awareness of those things to become manifest and reveal themselves. So in a way, I think that true social process is an ever expanding field. And that feels for me like a wonderful insight right in this moment. And to hold process, what it means to hold process like that is somehow to have our arms open, stretched, to be able to sense into what's happening on the periphery and be able to bring it into the conscious field of the process itself.
Sure.
And so when you ask the question about these times, well, I'm struck by the nature of the conversation we're having, which feels very alive and very generative and very real. And I'm also aware through 1.5 years of almost exclusive work on screen that that field is almost, it's really, really difficult. I don't think it's impossible, because I have had experiences of feeling into the field of the process that I am inside of. But I think it's so much more difficult, and very often it can't happen, and it doesn't happen. And so it's almost as if that feeling of that ever expanding field of true social process becomes a bit of a shrinking field, and contracting. And then our work becomes, how do we hold in our awareness and consciousness that sense of what it is that we're really doing, that we can build that expansive movement, even if it is in this two-dimensional space.
And then last thought before we come back to everybody, but it brings us full circle back to the writing thing. I wonder how we could maybe work with writing in these two-dimensional times to better hold that space of depth, of the backspace, of the invisible, of surfacing. And yeah, not just sort of notes of what happened in the meeting, but actually using writing as a reflective tool, reflective in the sense of the idea that when we reflect, we generate. And that opens up something for me. I do sometimes try work with people online with writing, but all the fears and all the anxieties come to the surface. So how can we work with writing in a way that is in some ways more focused, using it to access the invisible, but in some ways less pressured? It's not a product. We're not writing only for something to be consumed. We're writing in order to keep generating, to keep that field as open as possible. Yeah. So that's my last little thought. I'm curious to know if that sparks anything for you, but then I want to hand back to you to take us further. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, absolutely. It brings me full circle that on a certain level, we're writing for ourselves. And that writing for ourselves is that practice of keeping that space open, the backspace, the peripheral space, the open space, that space between the finger of God. And I think that where it brings me full circle is that when writing becomes a work of art, then it, I think, creates that possibility in each person to access that inside themselves, which is truly expansive and truly able to access that which is living invisibly in them and bring it into visibility through the act of writing. So I think it's a very important and wonderful way of keeping the space and the field expansively, elastically alive, so that it has that kind of movement, because this medium has the danger of making things rigid and static. And we have to work very consciously, not against it, against this medium, but what can we bring into it that can actually enliven and hold true to the practice that we know is that practice which brings together visible and invisible.
Sure. Wow. Thank you. Thanks, Sue. Okay. Shall I invite everyone to put their cameras on, or those who want to? And
well,
you can
it would be lovely if everybody put their cameras on, because it's so nice to see everybody. But yes,
fantastic. Thank you. And then I think you might want to change your video settings back to hide, undo, whatever. Yeah, but definitely put your cameras back on. Thank you, Sue. Thanks everyone for being with us invisibly. Yeah, I'm back to you, Sue.
So is Doug here?
I am indeed.
Where are you, Doug? I can never find. Anyway, Doug.
I'm here.
Oh yeah, you might. Oh, there you are. Okay, Doug. I would like to ask you if you can create breakaway rooms now for groups of 3, and we're going to ask you. Let me just check what the time is. For about 15 minutes, once people are in rooms, to just explore with one another what's coming up for you now. As you have listened to this conversation between Sue and me, perhaps as you've read the paper and some thoughts or questions that might have come up for you, and also what Sue and I had been thinking about, and it's come up quite strongly in our conversation. What does it mean to hold a space of social process? So if we can go into groups of 3 and whatever is coming up for you, and if the thing of holding process comes up, that's fine. If it doesn't matter, but to just explore with your partners what's coming up for you now. Thank you,
Sure.
Doug.
Sue, do you want to be in groups as well?
No.
Okay. I thought not. And I have the groups already. There are 2 groups of 4. Actually, no, only
That's
one
fine.
group. Only one group of 4.
Okay.
I've tried. Oh no, sorry. Somebody just ducked out, so I'm going to fix that one. There we go. Everybody, I think, is in a group of 3. Some people are popping out. Okay, just give me a minute. All right, almost there. Okay, there we go.
Back at quarter past the hour, Doug.
Okay, will do.
Thanks.
There you go.
Also press this join button here.
Yeah, that's what you must do, yes.
Hi, Doug.
Hello, Theo.
I didn't receive the invitation.
Okay.
Good.
All
Me
right.
neither.
I'm going
Good
to
neither.
assign you to room number 4. There we go.
Thank you.
And Guto, I'll send you. Let me see if there's a room with 2. Okay, I'll send you to the first room we have here. To room number 1. There we go. Oh, I see.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Guto, did you get a message to join? I think you did. Whew. Well done, Sue. That was so wonderful.
Was it, Doug?
Yeah, it was really nice. It was so innovative. I don't know if that's a word. Sorry, let me just no. I don't know where Sue Soul is. Is she still around? Hello, Sue. Soul.
Maybe she's gone to a group. Did you put her into a group? Because
I think she pressed join, and now
Okay.
she's on her own.
Oh.
You can always leave.
Yeah. And then she'll join us.
Yeah. You are Proteus Initiative with capital P, and I think Alan is with a small p.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I can hear that he's in a group now.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Oh, Deborah has not joined. I wonder if you, Deborah, are you here? Okay. Maybe she popped out. Cool.
Yes, Sue.
Yeah, she's back. She clicked join. Did you click join? You're on mute, sir.
Hello. I thought, let me join, and then nobody joined me. So I waited a bit, and then that was it.
Do you
Yeah,
want to do a group, Sue?
I gave you a group with Sue, so you two will be.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, thanks, Doug. I thought you were going to do that. Then I thought maybe I got one of the people who'd left. So that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's all only Catherine Galt. I don't know where she is. Remember Catherine? She hasn't joined. I wonder if she's stuck in limbo. And then
Catherine and Deborah.
Deborah
How do
Hancock.
you know, Sue?
I changed my settings. I went back to show non-video, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I went to the
No, but how do you know that there's some people who aren't in breakaway groups?
Because I can see them here, Catherine and Deborah.
Oh, I
Hello,
can't.
Catherine. Ah,
Because you still on high video
Doug,
non.
This is all being recorded.
We can video.
yes, cool. Shall I turn it off? I'll pause.
Every time I'm.
Gosh, guys, we got cut off right at the peak of the excitement of our conversation. That 15 minutes was not enough, Doug. I think next time, half an hour, please. Yeah, it's actually amazing how when you actually engage on something like that, once you get the conversation going, it actually the mind just starts to fly. Thanks for arranging that, Doug.
So Kaya, it feels like you've opened up the conversation, and would you like to continue? Because what we'd like to do is really open a space for you to share whatever it is that's living strongly in you from your conversation now, and to see how we can perhaps weave amongst us a conversation. Do you want to carry on, Kaya?
Gosh, I put my foot in it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, just as a departure point, I mean, the way our conversation started was when we listened to your conversation. I admitted that because this is not my vocation. It's not what I do every single day. The only writing I do is a couple of trips on Facebook, really. So initially I was a little bit distant, but as the conversation carried on, there were a couple of things that I could pick up, even though this is not what I do every single day. And I connected the fact that CDRA, being an environment that is got scholarly writers, and I work in a corporate sort of finance environment, which is more often than not particularly engaged at an emotional level. Everything is very straight down the line, very competitive, and sometimes we're just not necessarily connected emotionally with what we're doing. And I was saying that the times that I do spend at CDRA, even though we're doing finance and we're discussing business-like things, one cannot help but actually pick that spirit up within the corridors of CDRA and take that away with me every time I go away from CDRA back to my normal environment. And being in that space often gives me a lot of perspective, even though the proficiency of writing and trying to get messages across is not necessarily my forte. So having mentioned this as my starting point to my two colleagues in my group, and then they started opening up about what all this meant to them. There's a whole lot of other things that we do in life that in our own little spaces do not necessarily realize how connected they are to other things that other people do in the world. So that's obviously now we started I'm bouncing back a lot of ideas of things that I'm thinking now on the back of what they're saying. I just thought it's amazing how much you can learn from an environment where you actually either shut yourself out emotionally or even sometimes mentally. or have got a certain perception or have got a certain opinion of. And just by sharing small ideas and thoughts with one or two people who probably do things very different from you, there's actually a lot of commonalities in the way we conduct ourselves in life and in society. So having heard what they had to say, I mean, I was quite blown away. And the one thing for me that's stood out from their experience, and I'm relatively, I'm younger at 40, 41. I've not worked all that long, but it's something that is quite consistent, not only in my group, but with a lot of the folks that are in this conversation today. A lot of you have been doing what you've been doing for a very, very long time. And I live and work in a space where people chop and change their careers every 5 years, you know. So to see that durability and that consistency speaks beyond professional, in my mind at least, it speaks beyond professional competence. It talks about passion. It talks about living what you're actually doing, living and breathing it. And we started talking about why we actually do the things that we do. And we spoke about spirituality and being connected with what you're doing, having a reason for it beyond just money. And, so a couple of things like that came out of that conversation that we had, which I just thought are quite powerful. And in themselves, talking about life cycles, like I say, careers, people often, go into one space for 5 years and you've got this 5-year life cycle and off it goes and people change and go to something else. CDRA in itself is coming to the end of its organizational life cycle, but the life cycle of the people involved within the organization, it can go on for a very, very long time beyond the organization. And that's probably where the strength of any legacy lies. A church burns down. It's not the church, it's not the building itself that matters. It's the integrity of the people inside the church. So there are a couple of consistencies with what I see going on here and some of our conversation. And I think what we are attempting to do as a group of 30 or 40 participants here. Yeah, leave it at that. That's kind of what I picked up and my observations. And yeah, sorry, they're not informed by a lot of experience within the true essence of what CDRA does every single day, but yeah, it's maybe a slightly different sort of point of view.
Thanks, Kaya. Judy.
Did you think by sending a thumbs up to Kaya that I was saying I wish to speak?
Yes, are you not?
No, I wasn't particularly. Not at this time, but I was sending Kaya a thumbs up.
Okay, so I see, sorry, I'm still learning to read the language of Zoom. And for me, a thumbs up looks more or less the same as a hands up, but I can see that Tanya's got her hand up. So Tanya.
Maybe just to say to connect on from what Kaya was saying, in our group, we spoke about how often we're invited in to create space for real conversation and human connection in organization. And then when we try and do that, we met by the habitual ways in which that space is shut down and that life is kept out. How in so many of our social spaces, there's this real longing for connection and for depth of relationship. And then, yeah, all the ways in which we close it down and the challenge of finding different ways to invite that in and to support people to move through that resistance. And then for myself, the place of writing within that as the place where we meet that in ourselves, where if we're writing honestly, always, our writing shows us where we are the resistance and the work that we personally need to do to move through that. Yeah, without fail, it's the gift whether it shows up in the product or not is almost beside the point. That there's something in that process of writing that's, yeah, that allows us to open up to ourselves to the extent that we're willing to see and hear.
Yeah.
Can I say something, Sue?
Yes.
Because it's what you just said, Tanya, about like the writing and you said like honestly writing to us, to ourselves in a way. And in our group, we were talking about when we kind of lose that freedom to write first to ourselves, first to find out whatever is that we are in search of, you know, and in a way be able to really, really have that space of like a new journey that you are entering to and learning from as you write. It feels that there is like a commitment to write freely to us, to ourselves, and to learn first as something that is very important, because in our experience we were also sharing that whenever we kind of have like, you know, like the pressure in ourselves that we have to write a specific thing to prove or to someone or to arrive at a certain point or to bring something that you would like to, you know, write in that specific way at the beginning or as the center of your journey, it feels that actually your journey gets much less possible actually to happen, and you diminishes the possibility of your own journey. And we were talking about how that is for writing, but how that is also for processes of, you know, transformation and whatever facilitation and all that we are talking here. And we also comment on the importance then to have a kind of to enter into that space that is a kind of a freedom space, and how important it is to hold it lightly in a way, you know, because if you don't hold it lightly, then suddenly you are again making it something that is bigger than than the possibilities of the freedom of the space that is there. And how in a way is a challenging space also for us to do that with the normal ways that we've been, you know, like you're saying, the organization, like the social, like usual ways of being and of being with each other and of working and all of that, and how we have to invite ourselves to really create that space inside and outside, like you were saying.
Sue, can I say something? So we spoke a little bit about what it means to hold the space. And there were a couple of aspects that came up. One was to be receiving without judging, to transcend your own subjectivity to a certain extent, and also to embrace a bigger cause and to choose the good for all. And part of this was in order to come collectively to something that you can't come to in isolation. But the challenge is in preparing yourself to hold the space. How do you transcend your own drama? How do you transcend your own subjectivity? Because in a sense, what you're trying to do is lift the whole group to something that is higher. And The question is, how do you do that in a way that's both receptive and active? Because you can be receptive to the group, but the question is, what do you put in as an activity, as an inner activity to enliven and bring out what is essentially living partly unconsciously in the process? And part of what we came to was that insofar as we are trying to overcome our own subjectivity in preparation for something that's higher, that can live in the group, can we reenact that process within the process of the group itself? So what we go through in ourselves as preparation is what we're actually bringing as a prototype or a model in some way to work within the group itself. So there's this receptivity, but there's also this intervention. And the question is, how do we not only hold the group, but enliven the group? And where do we look for those sparks within the process that can enliven that process? I think that was a little bit of what we spoke about. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Khalif.
Yeah, already so much. Every time I want to jump in, and then there's more and more just to sit down and absorb. But I wanted to just reflect on a couple of pieces that came out of my conversation. One was that there were three of us in the group, and the sort of expansiveness of the field was revealed in that. We came from Brazil, South Africa, and Ireland. So just I guess the benefit of this medium also to allow for that expansion. And so that movement, that horizontal movement, was one of the things that we spoke, that came out in a motif of the vortex. So the wide horizontal expansiveness, but then also the depth. Because we spoke quite a lot about space, and we've been speaking now about holding space. But we talked about space being both the inner space, like we've been chatting about now, inside the practitioner, facilitator, the holder of what's going on for me inside, getting in touch with, through writing, also what's actually going on in for me. But there's also the outer space. And I rather created some envy about chatting about Towerland, and what a beautiful space Towerland is. And in the Afrikaans, obviously, it's Toverland, magical land. And so the magic of the land, and the presence of the space, the physical space that we occupy, when holding space, is equally important. Particularly, I think, with the social transformation type work that we're trying to do, because there are layers upon layers upon layers of the history of the land, which often is much longer than our own personal histories. And all of that's very present. And so holding lightly, just to pick up from what Keith was saying, how do you hold that space lightly enough for those layers to be peeled away, and to then also impact and influence what the human entities and other sentient beings can bring into the overall space that we hold. So that was some of the magic of the conversation that we had in our small group. Thanks.
Can I say something now?
Judy, now you can.
Thank you. I felt moved in the moment. I just wanted to bring in what we came to. Farid and I, and Denise, I think, had to do with grief.
It was Deborah.
Deborah, sorry, thank you. Deborah. And the introduction of the notion of grieving in closure or ending or so-called death, and just how unfamiliar a lot of us are with facing our grief and how we process that. And for me, I know that writing has been such a balm in a way in processing some of my grief around endings. So I just wanted to mention the grief word.
Can I say something, Sue? In response to you, Judy, I realize because I'm standing here with a lot of grief and a lot of tears. So I just want to say, firstly, tears is not all grief. My tears at the moment are not all grief. I feel very moved to be, at the moment on my screen, I'm next to Sue. And that's very beautiful. And I want to say that I have loved this whole process, Sue, and the writing and the speaking between Sue and Sue. It's been very moving for me. But in our group, let me say something came up again for me, which is that when you were speaking earlier, before we broke into groups, about how do you hold the social space? How do you hold the social space? I thought, well, what is a social space? Is this a social space? And what came up in our group is the nature of this online meeting, that it is predominantly a kind of a linear functional modality. And we lose all of those other elements that you were talking about earlier. Almost all of them are lost. The social is really lost rather than found. We find ideas, we find thoughts, we find meeting and so on, but we lose a lot of all that we've been talking about here. So that's grief. That's not a grieving process for something or a particular thing that is ending, but a grieving process for what we're entering, because I don't know who it was, maybe Sue Soul or Sue Davidoff, this time of COVID, we're entering a time of online, COVID or no COVID. And that's hard. And I was realizing that when we work like this online, when we work facilitatively into a group like this, we open ourselves. The process, Sue, you were talking about of facilitation, to have the group that you're working with move outwards, the whole space enlarging. We then have to enlarge too. And as we enlarge, we open ourselves. And as we open ourselves, I'm realizing more and more, we're opening ourselves to this medium, not to people. And so, yes, Khalib, the Tau Land experience is hugely wonderful. And I just want to ask everybody I meet to please try and meet wherever you are, however you are, whatever the physical space is around, to try and meet as much offline as is possible. It almost feels to me as if meeting offline is an act of activism at the moment.
Good point, I must say. Thank you, Alan.
So can I say something?
Please, Liz.
Al, you're talking about linear functional, the modality, the linear functional modality is something that came up in our pair. Actually, I was just with Alan Fowler. There was not a third person, but about writing, where we talked about writing compared to typing, and how we actually, well, he reminded, we both went back and, you know, learning to write with a dipping pen and italics and that form of writing which in itself is a bit of an artwork, but also that it involves this movement of the body, of your arms. I still find I can't start a piece on the computer. I have to write it to access what is living inside. Somehow has to come out through my body in the movement of actual physical writing, and how different. Yeah, so we were talking about that. What is the quality? What's shifted in the quality through the fact that we are now typing, actually, and the thoughtfulness that has to come through the writing, knowing that if you can't just delete, cut and paste, swap around, you know, that type of editing. That writing in that editing way, rather than a kind of really connecting deeply with your thoughts and writing through actual writing. So that was something that really came out strongly in our group for me.
So I would just like to connect with what Alan was saying, because I'm thinking, I'm looking around the group and I see we're mostly older, of the older generation, right? And we have experienced technology in a very different way. And I was thinking about my son, who is in his teens. For him, technology is an extension of his arm. And so I have to conceptualize with pen and paper, and he conceptualizes on his phone or on his computer. And I'm wondering, I mean, that the technology that we have is opening up new possibilities that maybe as the older generation, for us it's harder to meet the possibilities. Of course, there are things that are lost which we feel because we've experienced another way of being, and I don't think the younger generation feels it as much as those that have experienced another way. And so for me, there are advantages to both ways, and I guess, you know, I'm reminded of what the printing press brought to society, and it opened up new possibilities in a way that, as the society was in that time and space, couldn't even envision, in the way that we couldn't have envisioned what the internet would have looked like. You know, when I was much younger, I mean, I started learning how to, I was introduced to computers in my 20s. And so that's my 2 cents.
something as well?
Patricia?
I think that we spoke a lot about space and creating space. And from Jasmine's speak, what popped up to my mind very strongly, and that I want to bring as well, is the ability to create time or to hold time for a little while. Because I think that for me, the technology, the biggest challenge that I face with technology is the chunks of time being treated as a product, as something, traded. And I'm still sitting with Farid's first image on the avocado and on the seed of the avocado. And Halib has brought a lot about the space and towerland and the inner landscape as well. And there's a passage on one of Steiner's books where he says that he finds a house in the middle of a forest, and there's a tree that has entered in the house. Its branches had entered in the house. And then he realized that he is seeing time manifest spatially. And for me, the relationship with writing is a relationship that allows me time for me to find a space within myself. And I also would like to thank you, Sue, because as I was preparing for today's workshop, innerly preparing, I read your essay, and I couldn't finish this. I couldn't go to bed before finishing it because it moved so deeply within me, and it connected me to you spatially, but also to eternity in a way. So I'd like to bring this to our group.
I would love to say some things in response to what I've been hearing. And it's felt really, really moving to hear all of you. I'm sitting here feeling very quieted and actually very slowed down. And I have loved the pace and the tempo of this collective space. It's felt so unhurried somehow, just as it should be. And yeah, I wanted to, there's so many things, but what really comes to me as a central kind of a feeling is it has to do with space, because space has come up very strongly, holding space. And Keith, I think that holding space in the way that you're speaking about it and I'm speaking about it is both being active and receptive. It's the holding is a very, very delicate sensing into perhaps the other image that has come up, which is an image that's living so strongly for me at the moment of a vortex, of stretching outwards to the periphery and also plumbing the depths. And all of that, in a way, can only happen if we're doing that work inwardly. And so I think that what comes through so strongly from what I'm hearing from everybody is the inner space and the inner spaciousness that we have to create within ourselves so that we can really respond to a situation in a way that allows that situation to unfold itself faithfully to itself. It also means a huge amount of inner work in terms of, Keith, again, your reference to subjectivity, how we can work with this notion of subjectivity so that our subjectivity becomes a strength and a contribution rather than something we want to try and get rid of, because we will always be with our subjectivity. But how do we make it more reliable, perhaps more true to sensing what's happening around us? So I think that so much of what many of you are pointing to has to do with that sense of the inner work that we have to do to stretch ourselves, to stretch horizontally, to stretch to plumb the depths of ourselves, to feel that invisible backspace, and to really constantly reflect as a generative activity, to reflect on who we are and what it is that is needing attention within ourselves. And I think that for each person, we find our own way with that. There is no one way that can be prescribed for everybody. I also feel that there's something about, Yasmin, what you were speaking about. This is the medium that we have. And I did mention when Sue asked me that question about online work, the grief that I feel. I also know the huge responsibility that I feel to make this medium work in a way that it isn't functional and linear, but that can begin to weave something of life into it. And I think so much of that possibility lives with what I was just saying now, of the inner work that we do to create consciously the space with which we enter every situation, whether it's online or whether it's working together face to face. So for me, that feels like a really, really important element. I wanted to also say, Khalib, thank you so much for speaking about how the space around us impacts on how we work together and how magical spaces really lend magic to process, and how important it is. And when we lose that, how much we are really losing. Tanya, this whole thing of resistance, I think that we really do meet ourselves so deeply in our writing, and we discover with such accuracy and precision where we are and what it is that we're coming up against in ourselves. And while that's tough and challenging, it's such an incredible gift if we can stay the process. So yeah, writing feels so seminal in all of this conversation. And Farid, I wanted to say to you that I love that you brought Martin Buber in, because Martin Buber has been such an important part of my journey. And I think that it's such an important part of precisely what we're talking about. We can't do this work on our own. We actually need one another. And we need one another in that true honoring and sacred encounter where we really are able to discover and become enlarged in ourselves through the way in which we are met and meet the other. And holding that as central to practice feels so important, because we really do need each other, and we need each other more than ever at this time, when the odds are stacked against intimacy, relationship, and love. Yeah. Sue, I wonder if you wanted to say anything.
Thank you, Sue. Sure. What a beautiful space. So I want to thank Sue and thank everyone for being here and being so fully here. The two words that remain for me, the one is commitment, which I don't think it's a word we've said into this space, but there's something about writing and facilitation that holds, that both shapes and responds to a space that involves a certain kind of commitment. And, you know, just thinking of some of the instrumental uses that social process work, the work that CDRA was founded to do, the uses that that work can be put to is so often instrumental. You know, it's just, I just get this product out, just kind of come and make the conversation nice. So I really take away this question of how do we work in social spaces that allows us to really do that shaping and holding. And there's something there about commitment that comes up. But the other word that really stands out for me today is feeling. I think for many of us, it's been quite a moving encounter. And I realized with CDRA, as Farid put it so beautifully, you know, that the church, you could say, no, it wasn't Farid, somebody else said the church can burn down, but I think maybe it was Kaya, but the people are still there. So what remains, and what do we remain true to? What can we stand by? What do we express our commitment to, even though this organization, this form is closing? And I think there's a danger, particularly even in an online world, of we can't miss what we don't know. So this experience, even here in this online tiny little mini community, this mini moment we've had, is, I think, the thing to keep holding. That's the thing that I return my commitment to hold those kind of spaces wherever we are, even on an online forum. Because when you've had the experience of the space, that is what you want to keep holding. That's what you return to. And those of us who facilitate, that's what we keep trying to keep open. So thank you for this experience of the feeling. Yeah, thank you. I don't know, do we go to Sue? Back to Sue? Who do we go to next?
I think we go to Doug, but I did want to just say a huge thank you to everybody for what has been a very profound and moving and feeling-filled time spent together today. Thank you very, very much. Doug. Farid wants to say something.
Go ahead, Farid.
You may want to unmute yourself, Farid.
Doug, I go ahead in terms of my message to you and Sue. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. So before I say a word of thanks to everybody for joining us, I say people are beginning to send bye-bye notices already. Just a very last thought. Unfortunately, in the beginning, Doug, when we started joking about the length of my CV, the conversation turned a little bit too much to me as the chair of the board. And I, in my own vanity, omitted to acknowledge the shoulders that I have been standing on and the bodies that have been carrying me. And at this time, we're not talking about Ellen as in some ways the ideological or the visionary father of this organism, dying, living organism called CDRA. But yeah, there were other board members that were present, who really have been carrying me. It has been, it continues to be a partnership, I can think of the person who invited me to join the board. This Dai who is here, an absolute pillar of strength, invited me to join the board. And I since invited others to join the board, and they, one of them died recently, Sisa, and the other one is still on the board, Kayum. Unfortunately, time differences in New York. And they've made their own contributions. And then, of course, there is James, but quite frankly, that I've leaned on more than any other person since I've been chair of the board. And if it weren't for James's carrying me right until now. And right until now, I don't think I would have been able to stay the course. And so, folks, you know, one of Sue Davidoff's last comments, perhaps in too sharp a way, Arisitas makes a comment about attributing things to people and not to the flags that wave and the faces just that we see. And he says, beware what you ascribe to leaders, you take from the people. Take from the leaders, give to the people. For leaders are colorful flags. They wave and waver as the wind blows, as people work the bellows and make the world winds thunder. So as I pay homage to the giants on whose shoulders I stand, and as people pay homage to me, Doug, that was very, very thoughtful and very kind and generous of you in the beginning. We stand on the shoulders of the Marlenes. We stand on the shoulders of the Mamashilas, the domestic workers, the receptionist in the front, the security guards whose names we don't know. So whatever kind of giants, you know, we may imagine to be. And I do think that we should be grateful for all the gifts that we have. None of us should ever be in rejection or in denial of the gifts that destiny or God or the transcendent, however, has afforded us with. And at the same time, this must never be at the expense of ignoring those who made us. So in this particular moment, thanks, Kaya. Your support has been invaluable. And yes, you brought in what many of us don't like to talk about. It is too banal: money, organizational management of finance, fiduciary responsibility, that big word, you know. But yes, you brought a lot to the table just besides your skills. And thanks, Dai, thanks, James. Kayumi's not here. Nomvula sent in a message of support and presence with us, and her eternal presence with the spirit of CDRA. So with those kinds of acknowledgements, finally, a warm acknowledgement to all of you who joined us today, particularly the team who's put this together, but also for those of you who've survived and thrived, hopefully along with your doubts and cynicism about us and CDRA also. I want to say a warm word of gratitude to all of you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next workshop stroke webinar. And hopefully, Ellen, we will move into a world of actual workshops. As you were saying, in some ways, personal meetings has become an act of activism, an act of resistance. Much love to all of you. I thoroughly enjoyed it, as did, I think, all of us.
Thank you, Farid. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Farid, for that. That was a good closure. I was asked to say something about the next seminar, which we are so lucky to have, Sue Sol herself presenting. And that's going to be a really deep look at the experience of practice in CDRA over a large span of CDRA's life, its practicing life. So really looking forward to that. But the details you can see for yourself on the website. And I think many of you have signed up already. Thanks again, everybody. It was so nice. And I hope to see many of you. We hope to see many of you at the next one.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.